that I, for one, will take it as extremely insulting if any person of faith makes the assumption that their faith gives them a moral edge on me. I want to hear a lot more apologizing from the faith-based communities for the evil that they've done before they even start clearing their throats and telling me I wouldn't know right from wrong without their permission.
And isn't the core principle of Christianity that God offers his love to us? Christ died for our sins, but there's nothing compulsory about it. It's completely a free choice. You have a free choice. No one's forcing you. You've chosen to reject it, but nobody made you.
Well, you can, of course, you're free to reject it. I'm here to illustrate that point to the best of my ability. But in a very large number of times and places, the price of rejecting it, or even of seeming to reject it, has been very high. And not just in the sense of eternal punishment after death, but extreme punishment and persecution during the life one actually has. So, explain a little riddle in the introduction about Mrs. Watts, my first and in many ways my best teacher when I was 9. She was my nature teacher in a lovely little school in the west of England. She was also my scripture teacher. So she would take us on nature walks, show us the beauties. Then she would do us search the Gospels. And everything would have been fine if this lovely lady hadn't overreached one day and tried to combine her two roles, tried to fuse them. And on a nature walk say to us, look children, how beautiful and green all the vegetation is, the trees, the grass, the leaves, and how good that makes God, doesn't it? How kind also it makes him, as well as how powerful. Green is the color most restful to our eyes. And God could have made it mauve or orange or purple if he'd wanted to, and there'd have been a terrible clash and wouldn't have been so comfortable. And I was 9, and I knew nothing about chlorophyll or photosynthesis or evolution by natural selection or any of these things, but I remember thinking, that's nonsense. The eyes have adapted to the environment, not the environment to the eyes. And from that moment onwards, I've been able to see through all arguments from design, however subtly they're put, or by however clever a person. Now, the subtitle of my book is that religion poisons everything, and some people come up to me and say, or ask me at meetings like this, come on, lighten up, can you be serious? Everything? Do you really mean everything? I mean Italian cooking, fried green tomatoes, chess, tantric sex, whatever. And yes, as a matter of fact, I do mean to say this, because I think that the religious cult, the impulse to worship, in other words, the impulse to displace ourselves onto a higher and unalterable authority, in some way attacks us in our very deepest integrity, and it threatens to take away from us what is our most precious as well as our most worrying and anxiety-making thing, which is our need for responsibility, our need to accept it for ourselves, and our wish to be free, contrasted with our wish, very frequently and very noticeably expressed, our wish to avoid responsibility and our fear of being free. And it's the latter two things, it seems to me, that religion caters for. We're offered in religion the chance to have our sins not just forgiven, but taken away from us altogether. We're offered the chance to throw them on somebody else. We're offered what I consider to be the horrible and rather immoral doctrine of vicarious redemption, whereby it's as if you never sinned in the first place. It's not like having your debts paid. It's not like having wasted time made up for you. It's as if you've been cleansed, as if you never did it. This is an absurd abandonment of responsibility, and it takes the form, an unpleasant form, well known to the peasants of antiquity, of scapegoating. You simply throw it all onto another party and make that party, sometimes an animal, sometimes a human sacrifice, bear these sins away. Out of this kind of ritual and out of this kind of negation of responsibility, it seems to me, we have to grow. So that's the first point. It denies us our moral autonomy. It is said that we need God for morality, or perhaps I shouldn't caricature my opponent's position. It is said that without some appeal to the divine, to religion, we would not ourselves be able to tell a right action. We wouldn't know how to ground ourselves ethically. We wouldn't know right from wrong. We wouldn't know precisely how to make the distinctions. I believe the contrary is the case. I believe that my mother's ancestors, if they ever did really spend all that time getting to Mount Sinai, which I think is, by the way, a mythical story, but never mind, let's take it as true for now, would not have got there and would not have got that far if they'd been under the pre-existing impression that adultery, perjury, murder, and theft were all fine. It's rather from religion, from us, from human solidarity, from the knowledge that all societies have, that they cannot possibly evolve if they countenance murder or perjury or theft. That religion takes its morality. The stuff that's in the Ten Commandments, Dinesh, that isn't to do with human morality, is often highly immoral. For example, it's forbidden even to covet other people's goods or achievements. And by the way, among their goods are included their wives, their womenfolk, who are lumped in with chattel, which goes to show that these commandments are created by men and not by gods. They're created by the agricultural and masculine values of the time. It's not a small point. But there's nothing, for example, to condemn the abuse of children. There's only a vague demand that parents be respected. After all, this is coming from, apparently, a father. There's nothing against racism. There's nothing against slavery. There's nothing against genocide. Partly because in these and ensuing chapters, all those things, racism, genocide, slavery, are actually going to be not just recommended, but enjoined, made an actual injunction on the children of Israel. They're going to be told to do these things. So it seems to me very obvious that what is known as religious morality is partly man-made, and it shows. It shows that it's made by a greedy and cruel, partly evolved, fairly highly evolved, let's not run ourselves down too much, primate species that turns out on examination to be, as we now know, 1/2 chromosome away from a chimpanzee. Well, the other objection, and it comes out of this one, is that religion gives us a false picture of moral reality. If it were true that religion was the source of morals and ethics, then you'd have to be able to answer the following two questions that I'm going to pose to you, and take your time to answer them, and we have plenty of time to discuss this when we move to the public phase of this evening. You have to name for me a moral action committed or an ethical statement made by a believing person, by a person of faith, that I couldn't make as an unbeliever. Okay? I've challenged the Archbishop of Canterbury on this in public, and many other spokesmen of many religions, and I've not yet had a persuasive answer. You have time. Think of something I can't do that's moral, or I can't say that's moral or ethical, because I'm not a believer. Take your time. Now there's a corollary question. Think of a wicked thing done, or an evil thing said by somebody purely because they are a person of faith. You've already thought of one. You don't need any prompting from me. The suicide murder community is almost entirely faith-based. The genital mutilation of children is exclusively religiously motivated. Sins that hadn't been thought of before, things that we've hardly had time to think of condemning, are actually advocated by men of God, and often in the name of God, as a matter of obedience to his will.
Religion tries to take credit for morality, but humans understood murder, theft, and lying were destructive long before Scripture wrote rules down. Biology explains the natural world through adaptation, chlorophyll, photosynthesis, and evolution, not divine decoration. Even the Bible exposes the problem. Exodus 20 treats a wife as property to be coveted, along with servants and animals. Exodus 21 gives rules for slavery. Deuteronomy 20 gives commands for war and destruction. So when religion claims to be the source of morality, the text itself becomes evidence against that claim.
So just bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, if you do want things to get a little warm later on, that I, for one, will take it as extremely insulting if any person of faith makes the assumption that their faith gives them a moral edge on me. I want to hear a lot more apologizing from the faith-based communities for the evil that they've done before they even start clearing their throats and telling me I wouldn't know right from wrong without their permission. I'm sorry, I won't be, can't be spoken to in that tone of voice, and nor should any of you. On with the false picture of reality. Religion has its grandeur. The reason why this discussion is always so interesting, always so worth having. The magnificence of religion comes from the fact that it was first. It was our first attempt. It's our first attempt to make sense of the cosmos, our first cosmology, our first attempt at philosophy. in many ways, and in some of the books, our first attempt at literature and poetry. In some ways, our first attempt at medicine, even at physics, at all the sciences and some of the arts. This was humanity's first fumbling attempt to look at the sky and see where it fitted in. All credit to religion for trying this. Someone had to. Because it was the first, it is also in many ways the worst. What happens when you don't have a germ theory of disease and you wonder where the plagues are coming from? Well, you either think they're a punishment from God, or you think, depending on how far we've gone along into the medieval years of religion, they come from the Jews poisoning the wells, or from witchcraft, or from people not going to their prayers enough. The same about natural phenomena like earthquakes or floods. There must be a supernatural explanation for things that, of course, we now know can be much better and more accurately explained for us. So the fact that we are still burdened by the false picture given of reality and of nature by religion is, I think, not the smallest of the indictments against it. You still hear, at times like Katrina or the Pacific tsunami, you will still hear men of religion, including in civilized and advanced and educated countries such as England. The bishops saying, this is because of sin that there is an inundation. And out of this, it seems to me again, we must teach ourselves as developed humans, evolving humans, to grow. There are essentially two choices once we've got past the fearful childhood of our species and the terror with which we had to face reality in those days. We can either say of ourselves and to ourselves that we are here because of a divine design, or we can admit that we are here because of processes we don't fully understand, but that are cosmological in the first instance, the Big Bang, and Darwinian, to give it a shorthand, the consequence of evolution by natural selection and random mutation in the second. Now, it's an interesting thing that religion now wants, having fought very strongly against cosmology, having fought against any discovery that threatened the idea of a man and God-centered Earth that was itself the center of the solar system, that was itself the center of the universe, and having fought very hard and still fighting against the idea of evolution by natural selection. The great thing about being religious is this: when the evidence against you becomes overwhelming, and you can see the amazing intricacies of the Big Bang and the extraordinary matter of the Hubble red light shift and the things we can now see through Mr. Hubble's telescope, and when you see the extraordinary variety of species, religion says, come to think of it, that is true. In fact, it shows that God was even more ingenious than we had thought him in the first place. What's my objection to this kind of argument? Well, of the many I could make, the first is simply this: it's completely impossible to refute. Because every time any new evidence comes to light, it's claimed for, well, it fits with the unoverthrowable theory that we already had. Some of you will have been taught already, I hope, that a theory that can be described as unfalsifiable is, to that extent, a very weak theory. And that seems to me to apply with overwhelming force to the religious or godly explanation of our presence here and the natural phenomena around us. I can imagine, a little pressed for time. Can you give me a rough idea? Okay, that's not long. I'm going to be very quick and say what I've been implying, and I was going to lead up to a bit more slowly, which is that this referring upwards of these questions of responsibility, of freedom, of inquiry, this referring upwards of them all the time to a celestial authority is, in my opinion, as well as futile intellectually, potentially very sinister, because what it suggests is that we are governed by a kind of celestial dictatorship, by an unanswerable to unchangeable authority in the sky that can watch us, keep us under permanent surveillance, keep us permanently under watch, can convict us of thought crime, can guard us while we sleep, and that carries on this process of surveillance and supervision even after we are dead. It seems to me this would be a horrible thing if it were true. It would be worse than any known tyranny has ever been. But that in itself puts me in mind of something, which is that most of the tyrannies under which humans have labored in the past and continue to labor under in the present have in their essence been theocratic. Because once you can give to any other group of mammals and primates, any other group of humans who are essentially no better than you, the right to say that they speak in God's name, that they know God's will, that they have God's authority and God's permission, then there is no limit to the kind of totalitarian misery that can be inflicted on you in the real world, in the very few years of existence and life and potential freedom that we absolutely know for a sure thing we do have, that are not part of the metaphysic, but that are our common property, are our birthright. And this has been true since the early theocratic tyrannies of the Aztecs, the Babylonians, through to the idea of the tyrannies of feudalism and monarchism, against which the American Revolution was mounted, to many of the terrible 20th century tyrannies, fascism, Hitlerism, the South African system of apartheid, which was a branch entirely of the Dutch Reformed Church and its belief that there was a divine mission on their side, the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is shortly to get its own apocalyptic and Armageddon weapon, and other threats which make me think, and I'll rest my case here and wait for rebuttal, make me think that the battle against the religious illusion is part of a very important battle, not just for human emancipation, but actually potentially, if not really imminently, also for human survival, and therefore a battle that we dare not lose. Thank you.
Religion loses the moment it tries to explain reality. Disease does not come from sin, demons, curses, or God's anger. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention explains infection through germs entering the body and multiplying. Earthquakes, storms, and plagues have natural causes. The universe is studied through evidence like cosmic microwave background radiation, and life changes through genetic mutation and natural selection. When Christianity gets the facts wrong, it moves the goalpost and calls the new science God's design. That is not truth. That is a belief system refusing to admit it was wrong.
I must say that in Christopher Hitchens, as you heard, we have a formidable advocate for atheism. I think one made even more formidable by his impressive Richard Burton accent. I do want to begin by challenging a couple of the specific claims that he made, because I think that in these debates we're all entitled to our own opinions, but we're not entitled to our own facts. He began by saying that he challenged Christians, or anyone, to state a premise from within religion that is exclusive to Christianity, that would not be or could not be advocated, I suppose, consistently or in reason by an atheist. And I have an answer for that. It's simply Christ's principle or injunction to love your enemy. Now, obviously, any atheist can say that, but it makes absolutely no evolutionary sense. The whole point of evolution is to wipe out your enemy, who is a threat to your survival and the perpetuation of your genes. Yes, you might make temporary bargains with people for your own gain, but the idea of universal brotherhood, of taking care of the stranger, of pure altruism, of loving even those who intend you harm, this is a doctrine that I have never heard an atheist advocate, and I don't think anyone in good conscience could. Christopher Hitchens also said that suicide bombing is a religious patent, and that is actually not true. The most notable of the suicide bombers of the last century were the Japanese kamikazes, who were doing it not for religious reasons at all, but because of political dedication to the emperor, and you may say a kind of Japanese chauvinism and nationalism to win the war. It had nothing to do with religion. The Tamil Tigers, who are the inventors of the modern form of suicide bombing, happen to be Hindu, but their suicide bombing has nothing to do with that. It's ultimately driven by nationalism and tactical moves in a way to gain territory and power. So an attempt to simply take these actions and ascribe religious motives, even when none are present, I think is a little bit dubious. Even if you look at religious conflicts around the world, the Hindus and the Muslims aren't really fighting about religion, they're fighting about Kashmir. The Israelis and Palestinians aren't really fighting about God, they're fighting about land. So there's an effort here to blame religion for things that often have little or nothing to do with it. Then Christopher Hitchens gave a very memorable example of his teacher talking about why we like green stuff like pastures and blue stuff like oceans. And his own ingenious observation is that we have adapted to nature, not nature to us. In those two rather pathetic examples, I think his logic holds. But if you go further, you see that his teacher's argument is completely valid. Let's say his teacher would have framed it somewhat differently. Not that we happen to like green pastures, but aren't we fortunate to live on a planet where the sun is 8 light minutes away? If the sun happened to be further away, it would be too cold to sustain life. If the sun happened to be a little bit closer, we would scorch to death. Oh, isn't it lucky that in our constellation we have a large planet strategically placed like Jupiter, which vacuums up wandering asteroids and meteors and prevents large lethal objects from hitting the Earth? There's a whole scientific literature on this. Now, this has nothing to do with Darwinian selection. It is simply ludicrous to say that that because the dog and the wolf has a common ancestor, it has nothing to do with that. We're talking about the conditions that made evolution itself possible, the conditions that make it possible for life itself to exist on this Earth. And then if you say, well, we just happen to live on a lucky planet, no big deal. There are billions of planets and stars out there. The truth of it is the universe requires certain numerical constants for life to exist. The physicist Stephen Hawking, in his book A Brief History of Time, gives one very revealing example. He says that if the rate of expansion of the universe from the time of the Big Bang differed, not by 10% or 1%, but 1 part in 100,000 millionth million, we would have no universe, we would have no life. This is an argument for design at a completely different level than Christopher Hitchens' well-meaning English teacher. It's an argument that says that not just our planet, but the entire universe has to be as big as it is and as old as it is in order for us to be here having this conversation. This, I think, is an argument that needs to be answered, and I'll wait to see whether it is. I want to make a final point in my time about my own time. My time is up. Thank you very much.
The claim that Christianity invented enemy love collapses fast. Humans can cooperate, forgive, and protect outsiders without needing heaven to threaten them or reward them. Evolutionary science explains cooperation through kin selection, reciprocity, reputation, and group survival. Even non-human animals show care and sacrifice. So when religion says, you need God to be good, it is selling fear, not truth. Morality does not need a pulpit. It needs empathy, reason, and consequences in the real world.
I don't want to change the goalposts, of course, but I don't actually think that loving your enemy is always a moral injunction. There are some enemies I don't love and I don't think I should. It's not my right for people who might want to kill you and your children or kill my children. It's not my right to love these people. It's my duty to destroy them, to defeat them. There's nothing moral about saying, let them have their way, turn the other cheek. That would simply be my political, my secular, rather than my theological view. But I do think there is a problem with the rest of what Dinesh said on this point. The other injunctions about love, and we'll stay just with Christianity for the moment. A problem I always had with it was compulsory love. Not you're compelled to love your neighbor, or even not just to love him, but to remember to love him or her as you love yourself. An injunction that actually cannot be obeyed. Nobody with any integrity and self-respect can have the same regard for another person as he has for himself and perhaps his family. It's not to be expected. It's more than can be demanded. It's a work of supererogation. And it has the sinister corollary that because you know you can never quite do it, you're always falling short. You must always flagellate yourself for failing to come up to this magnificent idea. You're always going to be guilty again. You can't possibly be right. You're always in a state of sin. And this has the connotation, again, of the totalitarian, a law you cannot obey. Further, you're supposed to return this love to someone who is your creator. And you're told, in addition to being compelled to love this person, you must also fear him. Is there not a problematic element here? compulsory love for a being, a supreme being, of whom he must also at all times always be in fear. When I think of this, the image I get is of George Orwell's Big Brother in 1984, where adoration is extracted from people who are in a state of holy terror. It doesn't seem like morality to me. Now, the so-called golden rule, that we should have the same consideration for others that we expect them to have for us, is a very fine rule in its way. It has a limitation I'm about to mention, but it's a decent enough rule, and it's not hysterical, and it's not totalitarian, and it doesn't demand the impossible of people. Don't do to another what would be repulsive if they did it to you. We know that that was said by Rabbi Hillel long before Christianity, Babylonian rabbi. Something almost exactly in that form of words also appears in the Analects of Confucius. So it predates monotheism altogether. Some such idea is obviously innate to us. It's commonsensical. The limitation, I'll just mention it conversationally, is it's a rule that's only really as good as the person who's uttering it. The person who's uttering it must be a person of average moral character, because there are many people. Let me think of an example. Well, Charles Manson, for example. It's ludicrous for me to say of him that I don't want anything done to him I wouldn't want done to myself. Obviously, I want different things to happen to Charles Manson. I don't judge it by what I think I'm entitled to. So the rule is in danger of becoming tautologous and of breaking down. And that's why I don't think that there are, in that sense, religious or moral absolutes. And why it never makes any sense to say that we wouldn't know right from wrong if we couldn't refer it upwards to the unseen celestial court. There will always, unfortunately, be ethical and moral approximations, and that's part of the curse of our mammalian condition. Now, I deliberately did not say that suicide bombing, I think the record will show, was an exclusively religious monopoly. I said it was almost exclusively a religious monopoly, because I know myself about the Tamil Tigers, and I agree with what Dinesh said about that. I said the genital mutilation of infants community was exclusively religious. But if I'd been going to make an exception on the suicide murder and suicide bombing one, I wouldn't have chosen the Japanese kamikaze. After all, their emperor was a god in Japan. Japan was one of the most completely theocratic of the three countries that made up the Nazi-fascist axis. The emperor was, until he renounced his divinity, rather conveniently in 1945, a god. So anyone committing a kamikaze action was doing it to please the divinity. Just a point I don't think that is negligible. How much time do I have about Jupiter protecting us from meteors? Oh, that's all right. Well, we wouldn't be here if meteors didn't come smashing into the Earth at fairly regular intervals. It's almost certainly only because of a titanic meteor strike, probably on the Yucatan Peninsula, that the dinosaurs got out of the way, and the hitherto small, squeaking, frightened mammals that had been under their hoofs were able to evolve a bit and get on with becoming human. But if you're going to say that that physics and evolution are evidence of some divine design, here are some of the difficulties that you're going to have to face. First, whether or not there used to be nothing and there's now something, and that something is the miracle, however we resolve that, we do know one thing for absolutely sure. Our something is very soon going to be replaced by nothing. The Hubble red light shift, some of you will know about it, used to postulate that the Big Bang means that we're exploding away faster than we had thought from the original source. That matter is flying apart. The observable universe is flying apart much more quickly than we had thought. It was then thought for Newtonian reasons, well, that's going to slow down. The rate, at least, will slow down. Recent discoveries by a great physicist named Lawrence Krauss have shown to the contrary. The rate of expansion is actually increasing. In other words, very, very, very soon, it won't be even possible to detect the red light shift anymore. So a lot of nothingness is coming our way, and if that wasn't enough, the Andromeda Galaxy, which can be seen almost by the naked eye in the night sky now, is headed directly on collision course with our own. That's some design, isn't it? Of taking our own tiny little suburb of this magnificent cosmological city, our negligible little suburb, just our solar system, for an example, of all the planets in it, all of them but ours, are either much, much, much too hot or much, much, much too cold to support any kind of life, and of our own planet, huge tracts of it, the same can be said, either too hot or too cold, and on a knife edge. And we've only been on it for about 100,000 years minimum, 250,000 years maximum, and our tenancy on it can already be seen to be very short term. And in the meantime, we've discovered that of all the species ever put on this planet, or to have occurred on it, I mean to say, 98 to 99% have already become extinct. So if all of the things I've just mentioned to you, all of which are true and factually verifiable, are the responsibility of a deity, then there's only one conclusion you can draw. This deity must be very, very clumsy, very tinkering, very improvising, and very, very wasteful of cosmic and human and animal material, at least. He must be very, very capricious indeed, playing and toying with his creatures and his creations, and/or he must be very cruel and very indifferent. So if you want to award these responsibilities to your God or to your religion, then I'm entitled, I think, to wish you joy of it. Thank you.
The design argument sounds powerful until you look at the actual design. Nature is not gentle. Most species that ever lived are gone. NASA says the universe's expansion is speeding up because of dark energy, and our galaxy's future is uncertain, with possible massive collisions ahead. That does not look like perfect planning. It looks like chaos, violence, and waste on a cosmic scale. Christianity wants to call that good, then asks people to worship the designer. If this is design, then the designer has a lot to answer for.
Okay.
Wouldn't you say that we, well-matched as we are as chaps, and as magnificent mammals, either products of evolution or of a creator, that our position on this stage isn't precisely equivalent? In other words, you couldn't really resent it if I said, you've got a burden of proof that I don't really have. Because it's not just a matter, is it, of saying there might be a force, a life force, an originating force, which I can't obviously disprove. But you have to show that there's a force that actually cares about humans, intervenes in human affairs, cares which country wins a war, perhaps, even which party wins an election, who knows, but perhaps answers prayers, takes an interest. In other words, there's a big gap between deism, the idea of a god, and theism, the idea of a religion that can propitiate a god and can know what he wants of us.
Well, I would agree, in part, as upholding the affirmative in any debate, what's so great about God, I need to show what's great about God. Now, it's true that our topic is huge, and if you want to go into issues of why there's suffering in the world, or why do we believe in the Christian God, why Jesus and not, say, Baal or Allah or Krishna, then we've got to go into each topic, but they are a little far afield perhaps for this debate, although I'm happy to jump into them. So I won't assume the burden of proving all those things. I'll assume the burden of proving the resolution of what's great about God, and then if you want to pick particular aspects of it, I think we'll have to engage on those specifically.
Well, I mean to say, perhaps I'll try and rephrase it a little, that I see no reason to believe in the existence of any supernatural dimension, either cosmologically or on Earth, or in human life. I can live without it, and in fact I think everyone does live without it, whether they believe in it or not. You clearly don't think that, but you also think that salvation is attainable by this. It's not just a matter of proving that there might be a supernatural dimension, but that if you believe in it in the right way, your sins can be forgiven, you can be saved, and you can have an afterlife, a blissful one, that will go on forever. Now, don't you think that's quite a high burden of proof?
Yes, but I think that a lot of those things flow out of the premise of God. For example, there are a lot of things unbelievable in themselves that are completely believable if you posit God. For example, miracles are, if someone were to tell me, I know a way to make my hand grow twice as long, I would say that's preposterous. On the other hand, if he told me that there is an all-powerful, omnipotent, supernatural being ruling the universe, and if I pray to him, he has the power to make my hand grow long, that becomes less unbelievable, doesn't it?
Not to me, no.
No, because, well, but once you concede the premise, if you thought there was a supernatural being, you don't think he could do it.
No, but both claims are equally absurd.
No, but right. So then you're essentially giving me a false burden, because you're saying, Dinesh, not only do you have to prove the existence of God, you've got to prove these 10 other things, even though if I prove the first thing, all the other 9 would logically follow. You may not accept the first one, but you can't pretend like I need independent proofs of the other 9.
Well, no, I'm just simply saying I don't think theism does follow from deism. In other words, you get to the point which Spinoza arrived at and Einstein arrived at, and many other scientists and philosophers have arrived at by saying, well, there's enough harmony and majesty in all this for us not to be able to say or even want to say that there may not be a hand at work somewhere. But you can't get from that to a personal God whose mind you can know, whose will you can obey, whose help you can enjoin.
Well, I would agree.
All your work is still ahead of you, in other words.
I think that deism is a form of theism. It is theism light, you might say. I wouldn't put Spinoza on that category. He was more of a pantheist.
Yes, okay.
On the other hand, I think that deism does posit a supernatural creator, but somehow makes him an absentee creator. He started the clock, and then he stepped back. So it's a little bit of an idea of a lazy God. It's not my idea of a God. But on the other hand, deism may be one way to start on a full proof of theism.
Then, okay, fine. Then let me ask you a related or subsequent question. Given the number of gods there have been, you touched on, you've named some of them, Baal, Dagon, Thor, Artemis, anyone could come up with quite a long list. H.L. Mencken once got the list up to something like 10,000, the gods that we know have been worshipped. It seems to me that we have 3 possible alternatives. Let's not even say possible, thinkable alternatives. One, that all of these are false. In other words, that the proposition God made man in his own image is exactly the wrong way around. Instead, men made many gods in their own image. So either they're all false or they're all true, which, as I say, is only just thinkable because it's obviously nonsensical, or only one of them is true. And actually, if you chose that to be Christianity, you'd have to say, if you're a real Christian, it seems to me, only one version of that Christianity is true, because many of those are mutually incompatible. Now, do you really think, given the odds and given the scope and the scale of it, that the third answer can be the correct one?
Not only do I think it can be, I think that you can give reasonable grounds why it is. See, I think the strength of this argument or the lack of strength of it can easily be seen by purposes of an analogy. If I were to say, if we look at the ancient world, you have a number of philosophers, Thales, who thinks everything is made of water, and Heraclitus, and Parmenides, and Democritus, who thinks you have atoms. And just because we've got all these competing rival theories, it's probable that none of them are right, and there really isn't a theory that is right. Well, it turns out that Democritus was the closest. His atomic theory, actually, looking at it, making allowances for the difference of time and era, it's not that because you've got many theories, one is bound to be wrong. In fact, you could say that because all these religions represent human efforts to reach the supernatural, the fact that you've got so many efforts shows that it's quite likely that some efforts are closer than others. It's sort of like a way of saying, we're all trying to get up to the light up there. There are going to be different attempts, different theories for how to do it, but some of them may approximate better than others.
But,
and one might actually be the closest.
But surely that's not really an analogy. I mean, conflicting accounts of observable natural phenomena. Right? He's saying, what are the constituent elements of matter? We can see that nature is here. Is it all water? Is it all air? Is it phlogiston? Is it atoms? That's completely different from saying, whose God are you going to worship? And by the way, scientists do not kill each other for coming up with different interpretations, nor do they sentence other people to eternal paradise or torment for getting it right or wrong. Religion is something else than an opinion. I hope you'll agree.
It is, but let's
a faith.
Let's look at that.
It's a faith with a big promise attached to it.
I wouldn't say that exactly. Here's why.
The biggest trick religion pulls is turning one vague idea into a whole system of control. Even if someone proves there might be a creator, that does not prove Christianity. It does not prove heaven, hell, miracles, prayer, original sin, or that one ancient book speaks for the universe. Britannica separates deism from theism because a distant creator is not the same as a personal God who answers prayers and gives commands. Christianity still has to prove its own claims. It cannot hide behind maybe God exists and pretend the Bible wins by default.
Let's say that you've got a human level over here, which is to say the level of terrestrial man. Let's say that we have a divine level, which is perfection, perfect beauty, perfect goodness, perfect truth over here. I would say that the Eastern religions are trying to cross this huge chasm by diagnosing a problem. And the problem is essentially the word that we begin our sentences with, I. So if you can get rid of the self, the idea is, then you can achieve nirvana, liberation. Now that is not faith, that is actually a specific moral remedy for a specific human problem. Judaism and Islam have a different remedy. Here's the human level, here's the divine level. Here are a set of codes and commandments and diets and regulations. Pray 5 times a day, look in the direction of Mecca, observe Ramadan, and this ladder will take you human step by step to God. Christianity says, no, this is a noble effort, but it's not going to work because the gap is too large. If it's going to be closed, God has to close it. This guy up here has got to come down to the human level. That's the only way to bridge the chasm. Now, again, I haven't appealed to Scripture. I haven't appealed to faith. If you agree that I've given a reasonable approximation of the human problem, you can just assess, this is the Eastern solution, this is the Islamic and Jewish solution, this is the Christian solution. Which one seems to make the most sense?
Well, you did begin by a self-denying ordinance and say you weren't going to postulate revelation. But if
I
you're
didn't
going
appeal to revelation.
No, but your model just now would necessitate that, wouldn't it? And say, no, you're not building up to God. God is coming down to you. That must mean a revelation in the sense of an intervention.
No, but Christopher, my point is, I'm not appealing to revelation as a source of authority. What I was trying to say here is there are 3 competing explanations, and one of them is going to make human, intellectual, and experiential sense. So I wasn't appealing to revelation in that sense.
But you would agree, wouldn't you? I think you'd have to agree that anyone's entitled to say that all 3 of those would be false.
Well, of course you could, but you could reject the premise that there is a way to cross the chasm, and that would be the atheist position. So that would be a way of saying, no, we've got to live at level down here. There's just no way. This is simply a hocus-pocus level. This pure perfection and beauty is a myth. This is the way we are, where Darwinian primates get used to it. That would be a 4th position. So tell me.
I can almost see why people hold it when I hear you talk. Listen, because we are doing God, not just Christianity, and I guess I've probably only got about 1 or 2 questions left, and it's a matter of the majesty and grandeur of religion and God in general that we're talking about. Let me ask you this. If I was being born today in Saudi Arabia, would you rather that I became an atheist baby or a Wahhabi Muslim baby?
This is a trick question because, look, if you told me that you are going to be a baby destined to be a sort of miniature Bin Laden, then I would rather take Christopher Hitchens over Bin Laden.
Oh, thanks a lot.
It wouldn't be a close call.
God, that was like pulling teeth.
No, I was just hesitating because I don't want to write off the entire Muslim world as potential suicide terrorists, even in the infant stage. Hey, here's a Muslim baby, but it's worth less because it's going to, I think that's too harsh. I mean, there's a species of Islam I think we rightly fear, and I think we're on the same side of the aisle on that one. But I just didn't want to paint too broad a brush with the Muslim world. Is it my time?
Yeah.
What I mean is, when your turn's over, then I'll ask you questions.
Yes, sure.
It is, okay.
Yes, I believe it is yours, yeah.
Let me begin by clarifying a couple of things. You earlier referred to Charles Manson, and you said, I don't want us to treat Manson the way I want to be treated. But I think that the moral principle involved here is the following. It's not, should we treat Manson like Hitchens, but rather, we should treat Manson the way we would want ourselves to be treated if we did what he did. In other words, the moral principle here is, when it says treat others as you would wish to be treated, it's not Manson's a murderer and I'm not, obviously treat us differently, we know that. The moral principle is, obviously, put ourselves behind a veil of ignorance, in John Rawls' terms, and say, we don't know who did it. Let's say I was the guy who did it. What punishment would it be just to impose on me? Life in prison, the death penalty? Well, okay, it's not me, it's Manson. Give him that. So that's a way, ultimately, of applying, you might say, a neutral rule. So do you agree that the Manson analogy was flawed in that sense?
Then it would be, Dinesh, it'll be a different rule. The rule is, do not do to another what you would not want done to yourself. I'm saying, in that, I quite agree, by the way, with your Rawlsian take, but that's evolved without any reference to any injunction about a golden rule.
You spoke about compulsory love.
Yes.
But isn't the lesson of the book of Genesis, and isn't the core principle of Christianity that God offers his love to us? Christ died for our sins, but there's nothing compulsory about it. It's completely a free choice. You have a free choice. No one's forcing you. You've chosen to reject it, but nobody made you.
Well, you can, of course, you're free to reject it. I'm here to illustrate that point to the best of my ability. But in a very large number of times and places, the price of rejecting it, or even of seeming to reject it, has been very high. And not just in the sense of eternal punishment after death, but extreme punishment and persecution during the only life one actually has. So I'm thankful, very grateful to you, naturally, for giving me my manumission. But I don't actually think I need your permission to be free on this point, or the permission from the divine either. That's being unfree. It's like saying, of course when people ask me, have we got free will, I say yes. Of course we have. We have no choice. At least I know I'm being ironic, and that the irony is somewhat at my expense. But if you say, of course we have free will because the boss says we do, you've advanced the argument not at all. It's analogous to that.
Okay, that's the end of our head-to-head session. Thank you both, gentlemen.
What? I thought he had 15.
15 minutes.
Oh, but you know what? I think we misfired a little bit in that we were initially intending to go back and forth, but we carved the time, and he took the bulk of it. Let me have a couple more questions, and then we're happy to move it.
I think he should, don't you? Yeah.
Are you happy with that, Mr. Hitchens?
Yes, I think I unintentionally overrun my time this time.
Christianity loves to say belief is a free choice, but that falls apart when the threat is eternal punishment. A choice made under fear is not freedom. The Bible says unbelievers face condemnation in John 3:18, and Revelation 21:8 places unbelievers in the lake of fire. That is not love. That is coercion dressed up as mercy. Real freedom means people can reject a claim without being threatened by a God, a church, or a society that claims to speak for heaven.
You mentioned the issue about design, and you said that you've become kind of immune to arguments from design. So how do you think we got the universe?
Well, the term Big Bang was originally used, like the term Tory and suffragette, as a term of abuse, as a term of mockery, by Professor Fred Hoyle, who is at different times, he's a great physicist in Cambridge, at different times has been a believer and an unbeliever. But he thought the idea that things had begun in this way was so ludicrous that he said, oh, I suppose you think it all began with some Big Bang. I think it was on a BBC discussion program.
Right, now, but when Hoyle acknowledged the bang, he said, I'm quoting him now, it looks like some super intellect has monkeyed with the laws of physics.
Yes.
I'm quoting Hoyle.
Right.
And you're probably familiar with the quote.
Yes, well, so, he's been both a believer and an unbeliever. I'm not a physicist at all. I'm a member of no school, as far as this goes, but I know of no physicist who seems to need any supernatural help in explaining, or let's say better understanding, because we're only grazing on the very, very lower slopes and the outer limits of knowledge at the moment, that it's at all time to be able to postulate that there's a supernatural intervention involved, any more than one is required for the origin of species. Though I can't disprove that there was a divine hand involved in that too. It's just that everything operates just as well, every analysis, every explanation, without such an assumption.
Let me ask you finally about morality. you gave the example of human beings being 95% or 99% chimpanzee in terms of the similarity of genes. And yet, in the chimpanzee world, things work a little differently than the human world. You turn on the Nature Channel, you'll see that one gorilla, one ape will go into the lair of another, stupefy the rival with blows, grab the female chimp, drag her screaming and bloody to his own lair, rape her, and this is called the Nature Channel. Now, on the other hand, if you came to my house, stupefied me with blows, and did this to my wife, we'd all take a little different view of the matter. If we are merely evolved primates, where did the moral or ontological leap come from that makes two creatures almost identical genetically be assessed so differently in any moral compass that either you or I would use?
Well, I wasn't saying that we were equivalent, though, with half chromosome away, actually, is what it is with the chimpanzee. I wasn't saying that postulated an equivalence, though, again, the example you've given isn't quite the one that I would have chosen. Somewhere in the world right now, that's happening to a human woman. Actually, quite a large number of human women, I can bet you. That's
right,
happening. And for the minimum 100,000, maximum 250,000 years we've been on the planet, it's happened a great deal. And whereas the chimpanzee doesn't have a torture chamber, doesn't practice genocide, doesn't make war, doesn't have the refinements of cruelty that the senior partner does. Our difference is that we are the only primates who know how to laugh. We're the only ones who definitely know we're going to die. At least I think the evidence is pretty solid that we're the only ones who know that. And we're the only ones who make gods, and we're the only ones who think we can cheat death, or that an exception will be made in our own case. But it seems to me that gives us more in common with primates rather than less.
But what's in common is the behavior. The point I wanted to highlight is what's different is that in every human community, this kind of behavior would be seen as abominable. In other words, it's the moral evaluation that makes the difference. Obviously, you can find, that's why we use the term bestial conduct. You will find bestial conduct among human beings, but the difference is we assess it differently. You never get the idea that in the chimpanzee world, there's a small United Nations issuing declarations of chimpanzee rights. In fact, one of the interesting things about the debate about animal rights is that animals never seem to respect them. So the point I want to make is there is this huge ocean between the is and the ought, and it appears to be crossed only by our species. Now, doesn't that demand some kind of recognition instead of simply saying we're also capable of more evil, we're more capable of more good, and we're more capable of more evil, and we're more capable of the moral standards to know the difference. That's what makes us human.
That's fine, except that I don't think I can fully share the premise. I mean, as a matter of fact, in the great state of Mississippi, not very long ago, the rape and torture and bloodying and cudgeling of a woman would have had the sanction of law, and indeed of religion too.
But
so it's just not true to say that this difference is any criticism of my pointing out that these are our close cousins.
I'll close on this point, but it seems that your exception proves my point. The only way that human beings can do that is by excommunicating the person you do it to from the human species. So in some senses, you've got to make the other person less than human or non-human to justify doing it to them, and far from being an undermining of morality, that's a confirmation of it.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Religion keeps asking, how did we get here? As if not knowing everything means God wins. That is lazy thinking. Science has evidence: cosmic background radiation, expansion, genetics, and evolution. Religion has claims. And on morality, Christianity has no clean record. Humans learned dignity by fighting cruelty, slavery, racism, and abuse, often against churches that defended them. Morality did not come down from the sky. It was built through pain, reason, and the demand to stop treating people like animals. So here's the real question. If religion has been wrong about nature, wrong about history, and wrong about human freedom, why should it still get moral authority today? There is still more to this debate, so comment. More Hitchens below, and we will keep unpacking this debate with Dinesh D'Souza. Like, subscribe, and follow for more.